The sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the dusty town of Silverwater with hues of amber and gold as Teresa Morgan hurried down the boardwalk, keeping her head down and her lips pressed firmly together. The cruel whispers followed her like shadows, never quite fading no matter how fast she walked. Teresa had arrived in the small Wyoming Territory town just 3 weeks prior, in the spring of 1878, hoping to escape the pitying glances and hushed conversations that had plagued her back east. Born with a facial nerve condition that pulled the right side of her mouth into a permanent slant, she had endured a lifetime of stares and whispers. When her parents passed away within months of each other, leaving her with nothing but a modest inheritance and painful memories, she'd packed her belongings and headed west, determined to start anew. The bell above Hartwell's general store jingled as Teresa pushed open the door. She needed supplies: flour, sugar, coffee, and perhaps some fabric to make a new dress. Her savings wouldn't last forever and she needed to find work soon, but for now she had enough to get by. "Good afternoon," she said softly to Mr. Hartwell, careful not to smile too broadly. She'd learned years ago to control her expressions, to minimize the lopsided pull of her mouth that invited stares. "Afternoon, Miss Morgan," the storekeeper replied, his eyes drifting past her to the door as it opened again. A tall man in worn denim and a dust-covered hat entered, bringing with him the smell of horses and open prairie. Teresa stepped aside, clutching her list tighter as she recognized Nathan Wade, one of the most respected ranch hands from the Diamond Bar Ranch outside town. "Afternoon, mister." Hartwell, Nathan's voice was deep and clear, filling the small store. "Got that order ready for Mr. Donovan. Just finished packing it up this morning," Hartwell replied, gesturing to several crates near the counter. Nathan nodded, then tipped his hat politely in Teresa's direction. "Madam." Teresa gave a small nod in return, not meeting his eyes directly. Men like Nathan Wade, handsome, confident, respected, had never given her more than a passing glance back home. She expected no different here. "I'll be with you in just a moment, Miss Morgan, mister," Hartwell said, moving to help Nathan with the ranch supplies. Teresa pretended to examine a bolt of calico fabric while the men discussed the coming cattle drive. She was startled when a voice spoke directly beside her. "That'd make a mighty pretty dress." She looked up to find Nathan Wade standing there, his blue eyes meeting hers without flinching, without the familiar flicker of discomfort she was accustomed to seeing. Yes, I suppose it would," she stammered, waiting for his gaze to drift to her mouth for the subtle change in his expression. But his eyes remained steady on hers. "You're new in town," he stated. "Miss Morgan, right?" "Teresa Morgan," she replied, surprised he knew her name at all. "Nathan Wade." He touched the brim of his hat. "Welcome to Silverwater. You finding everything all right?" Before she could answer, the door opened again, and 3 young women entered, dressed in the latest fashions their frontier town could manage. They stopped when they saw Teresa, exchanging glances and poorly concealed smirks. "Nathan Wade," called one, a pretty blonde named Annabelle Miller. "We missed you at the social last Saturday." "Been busy at the ranch," he replied easily, but Teresa noticed his attention remained with her. "Miss Morgan and I were just getting acquainted." The women's eyes flickered to Teresa, taking in her plain dress and then, inevitably, her face. One leaned to whisper to another, and Teresa saw the familiar mocking smile spread across their faces. "How nice," Annabelle said, her tone suggesting it was anything but. Teresa's cheeks burned. It was always the same, no matter where she went. She placed the fabric back on the shelf. "Excuse me," she murmured, turning to approach Mr. Hartwell with her list. As she completed her transaction, she could feel Nathan's eyes on her, but she didn't look his way again. Men like him didn't truly see girls like her, not beyond a moment's curiosity, or worse, pity. Outside, the afternoon had cooled as Teresa carried her purchases down the street. She had taken a small room above the millinery shop owned by a widow named Mrs. Abernathy. The arrangement was temporary until Teresa could secure more permanent lodgings and employment. "Miss Morgan," Teresa turned to see Nathan Wade striding toward her, leading his horse, a magnificent chestnut gelding. "You forgot this," he said, holding out a small package wrapped in brown paper. Teresa frowned. I don't think thread, he explained. Hartwell said you paid for it, but he forgot to add it to your parcels. Oh, she reached for the package, careful not to let their fingers touch. Thank you, may I walk with you? These look heavy. He gestured to her packages. Teresa hesitated. In her experience, kindness from handsome men often had ulterior motives, usually involving cruel jokes at her expense, but Nathan's expression seemed genuine without a trace of mockery. I'm just going to Mrs. Abernathy's, she said. It's not far. All the same, it would be my pleasure. He took some of her packages before she could protest. As they walked down the street, Teresa was acutely aware of the stares they attracted. Nathan Wade was something of a local hero, having helped fight off a band of cattle rustlers the previous year. His accompanying the plain new girl with the crooked smile was bound to start tongues wagging. How are you finding Silverwater? He asked, seemingly oblivious to the attention they were drawing. It's different from Boston, she replied carefully. Boston. That's a fair distance to travel alone. I needed a change. She left it at that, not wanting to elaborate on the lonely years following her mother's death, the whispers that had followed her through school and church, the suitors who had never materialized. Well, Wyoming territory's about as different from Boston as you can get, he said with a smile. The winters are harsh, but there's a beauty here you won't find anywhere else. They reached Mrs. Abernathy's shop, and Teresa paused at the side entrance that led to the stairs to her room. Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Wade. Nathan, he corrected, handing back her packages. And it was no trouble, Miss Morgan. Teresa, she offered in return, surprising herself. Teresa, he repeated, and something about the way he said her name made her heart flutter unexpectedly. I hope you'll come to the town social this Saturday. It's at the schoolhouse, nothing fancy, just music and dancing, some food. Teresa's hand instinctively went to her mouth, a gesture born from years of self-consciousness. I don't think so, Nathan frowned slightly. Why not? It's a good way to meet folks. I'm not much for dancing, she lied. In truth, she'd loved dancing back in Boston during the brief period when her parents hosted soirees before her father's business failed. But that was before the other girls had made it clear that no one wanted to partner with the girl with the twisted smile. Neither am I, Nathan admitted with a disarming grin. Got 2 left feet according to most, but the pie's worth coming for. A small, hesitant smile escaped before Teresa could stop it, pulling her mouth into its uneven shape. She quickly pressed her lips together, but not before catching the flicker of something in Nathan's eyes. There it was, the moment of realization, of discomfort. She waited for him to make an excuse and leave, as others always did. Instead, he simply said, "Think about it," touched his hat brim, and turned to go. "Good afternoon, Teresa." Teresa watched him lead his horse back toward the main street, perplexed by the encounter. He had seen her smile, her real smile, not the careful, controlled version she presented to the world, and yet his expression hadn't changed. No disgust, no pity, no awkward attempt to hide his reaction. Maybe he was just being kind, or maybe he simply hadn't noticed. With a sigh, Teresa climbed the stairs to her room, telling herself not to dwell on Nathan Wade or his invitation. Men like him didn't court women like her. That was simply the way of the world, and no amount of wishing could change it. The next few days passed quietly as Teresa settled further into life in Silverwater. She found work assisting Mrs. Abernathy in the millinery shop, her nimble fingers and eye for detail making her adept at trimming hats with ribbons and artificial flowers. The work wasn't exciting, but it was respectable and provided enough income to supplement her dwindling savings. On Thursday afternoon, as Teresa was arranging a display of new spring bonnets in the shop window, she spotted Nathan Wade across the street, deep in conversation with the town's blacksmith. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up, meeting her eyes through the glass. He smiled and raised a hand in greeting. Teresa nodded in acknowledgement, then quickly returned to her task, her heart beating faster than it should. Twice more that week, she encountered him, once at the post office and again as she was leaving the small lending library with a volume of Tennyson's poems. Each time he greeted her warmly, asking about her day with what seemed like genuine interest. By Saturday morning, Teresa found herself standing before the small mirror in her room, considering her appearance more critically than she had in years. Her chestnut hair was her best feature, thick and wavy, falling past her shoulders when not pinned up. Her eyes were a clear hazel, more green than brown, set in a face that might have been pretty if not for the asymmetry of her smile. "Don't be foolish," she told her reflection sternly. He was just being polite, yet when Mrs. Abernathy mentioned the social that afternoon, Teresa heard herself saying, "I was thinking I might attend, actually." The older woman beamed. "Wonderful, it's about time you got out and met some people. You're far too young to spend every evening alone with your books." Teresa wore her best dress, a forest green cotton with a modest bustle and lace at the collar. She arranged her hair in a simple but flattering style and even dabbed a bit of rose water behind her ears, a luxury she rarely indulged in. The schoolhouse was transformed for the occasion, with lanterns hanging from the rafters and desks pushed against the walls to create space for dancing. A small band, 2 fiddles, a guitar, and a harmonica played lively tunes in the corner. Nearly everyone in town seemed to be in attendance, from small children darting between the adults to the elderly sitting in chairs along the perimeter, tapping their feet to the music. Teresa hesitated in the doorway, suddenly aware of how conspicuous she was a newcomer, alone, uncertain. Several people glanced her way, some nodding in polite greeting, others whispering behind their hands. She was about to lose her nerve when a familiar voice spoke from behind her. "You came." She turned to find Nathan Wade standing there, looking different than she'd ever seen him. Gone were the dusty work clothes, replaced by clean dark trousers, a white shirt, and a string tie. His dark hair was neatly combed, still damp from washing. "I did," she replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "I'm glad." He offered his arm. "May I get you some punch?" Teresa nodded, placing her hand lightly on his sleeve and allowing him to guide her through the crowd. She was intensely aware of the curious glances following them, the whispered comments. Nathan Wade could have his pick of any unmarried woman in Silverwater. Why was he paying attention to the plain Easterner with the strange smile? The punch was sweet and refreshing, with a hint of something stronger that Teresa suspected had been added surreptitiously. They stood near the refreshment table, making small talk about the weather and the upcoming spring planting. "Miss Morgan," a female voice interrupted, and Teresa turned to see Mrs. Donovan, the wife of the Diamond Bar's owner. "How lovely to see you here." "Nathan, you didn't tell me you were acquainted with Miss Morgan." "We met at Hartwell's last week," Nathan explained. "Teresa's working with Mrs. Abernathy at the millinery." "Yes, I ordered a hat there just yesterday," Mrs. Donovan said with a warm smile. "Your handiwork, I believe." "The blue one with the jay feathers?" Teresa nodded, pleased to be recognized for her work. "Yes, madam, I hope it meets your expectations." "I'm sure it will. You have a real talent." Mrs. Donovan patted Nathan's arm. "And you, young man, promised me a dance, if I recall." Nathan grinned. "That I did, Mrs. Donovan. If you'll excuse us, Teresa." "Of course." Teresa watched as Nathan led the older woman onto the dance floor. Despite his claims of having 2 left feet, he moved with an easy grace, guiding Mrs. Donovan through the steps of a lively reel. Several young women watched him with undisguised interest, including Annabelle Miller and her friends. "He's quite the catch, isn't he?" a voice said beside Teresa. She turned to find a woman about her own age with kind eyes and a practical dress. "I'm sorry, Nathan Wade," the woman clarified. "Half the girls in 3 counties have set their caps for him, but he doesn't seem to notice." She offered her hand. "I'm Nora Simmons. My husband's the deputy sheriff." "Teresa Morgan," she replied, shaking the offered hand. "And yes, Mr. Wade seems well regarded." Nora laughed. "That's one way of putting it. Good-looking, hard-working, and decent to boot, not like some of these cowboys who come through town." She nodded toward a group of rough-looking men near the door. "Those are some of the hands from the Flying J spread, troublemakers, most of them." Teresa followed her gaze, noting the men's disheveled appearance and the way they passed a flask between them, despite the sheriff's presence across the room. "Anyway," Nora continued. I just wanted to introduce myself. It's nice having another woman close to my age in town. Most girls here either get married by 18 or leave for somewhere more exciting. Before Teresa could respond, the music ended and Nathan was making his way back to them. Nora gave Teresa a meaningful look and excused herself with a smile. Would you care to dance? Nathan asked, extending his hand to Teresa. Her stomach fluttered with nerves. I warned you, I'm not very good. We'll make a fine pair then, he said with a grin. Come on, it's a waltz. Even I can manage that. Before she could protest further, he'd led her onto the floor and placed one hand respectfully at her waist, taking her other hand in his. The music began, a gentle, swaying melody that was easy to follow. See, not so terrible, Nathan said as they moved among the other couples. Teresa concentrated on the steps, afraid of treading on his toes, but gradually relaxed as she realized he was indeed a competent dancer, guiding her smoothly around the floor. She became aware of his scent soap and leather and something uniquely him and the warmth of his hand through the fabric of her dress. You mentioned you're from Boston, he said. What brought you all the way out here? Teresa hesitated. After my parents died, there was nothing keeping me there. No family, friends, she shook her head. My father's business failed before he passed. Many of our so-called friends disappeared along with his fortune. Nathan's expression darkened. Their loss, then. What about you? She asked, eager to change the subject. Have you always lived in Wyoming? Born in Missouri, he replied. Came out here with my father after the war. He was looking for a fresh start after my mother died, found work at the Diamond Bar and never left. Your father is still at the ranch, a shadow crossed Nathan's face. No, he passed on 5 years ago, pneumonia. I'm sorry, Teresa said softly. It was a hard winter, Nathan said, then smiled slightly. But he'd be pleased to know I'm still here doing what he taught me. The music ended and Nathan reluctantly released her. Teresa was about to thank him for the dance when Annabelle Miller appeared at his elbow, accompanied by 2 of her friends. Nathan Wade, you promised me a dance months ago, Annabelle pouted prettily. Are you going to make me wait all night? Nathan glanced at Teresa, a question in his eyes, but she stepped back. Please, don't let me keep you. He frowned slightly but allowed Annabelle to pull him toward the dance floor as a livelier tune began. Teresa made her way to the side of the room, finding an empty chair near some of the older ladies. She watched as Nathan danced with Annabelle, the blonde laughing up at him, her hand lingering on his arm. Such a lovely couple they make, said an elderly woman beside Teresa. Everyone's been expecting an announcement any day now. An announcement, Teresa echoed. Of their engagement, dear, the woman explained. The Millers own the second largest ranch in the county, and Nathan's practically running the Diamond Bar these days, with Mr. Donovan getting on in years. It would be a fine match. Teresa's heart sank. Of course, Nathan and Annabelle, it made perfect sense. 2 of the most attractive, well-regarded people in Silverwater, both from ranching backgrounds. And here she was, a penniless newcomer with a crooked smile, imagining that his kindness meant something more. She watched them for another moment, then stood. Excuse me, she murmured to the woman. I'm feeling a bit tired. I think I'll head home. Teresa slipped out of the schoolhouse into the cool night air, grateful for the darkness that hid the tears threatening to spill down her cheeks. She was being ridiculous, she knew. Nathan Wade had simply been kind to a newcomer. There was nothing more to it than that. She had walked perhaps half a block when she heard footsteps behind her. Teresa, wait. She turned to see Nathan jogging toward her, his breath making small clouds in the chilly air. You're leaving already? He asked, catching up to her. It's been a long day, she said, not meeting his eyes. And I'm not much for crowds. Let me walk you home, he offered. That's not necessary. I'm sure Miss Miller is wondering where you've gone. Nathan frowned. Annabelle, she's dancing with Tom Fletcher now. But I thought. Teresa hesitated. Someone mentioned you 2 were courting. Nathan's laugh was short and surprised. Is that what people are saying? No, Annabelle's father would like it, I'm sure, but she and I, he shook his head. We've known each other since we were children. She's like a sister to me. Relief washed through Teresa, followed immediately by embarrassment at her reaction. I see. Still, you should return to the social. I'm perfectly fine walking alone. It's dark, and some of those Flying J boys have had too much to drink, Nathan said firmly. I'm walking you home. They walked in silence for a few moments, the music from the schoolhouse fading behind them. The night was clear, stars blazing overhead in a way Teresa had never seen in Boston, where the city lights and coal smoke obscured much of the night sky. It's beautiful here, she said softly. Nathan followed her gaze upward. One of the things I love most about this country, no matter how rough the day's been, you can look up at that sky and remember how small your troubles really are. They reached Mrs. Abernathy's shop, and Teresa paused at the side door. Thank you for the escort and for the dance. My pleasure, Nathan said. Would you? That is, I wondered if you might like to go riding tomorrow, if you don't have other plans. Teresa blinked in surprise. Riding? Sunday's my day off from the ranch, he explained. Thought I might show you a bit of the countryside. There's a spot by the river that's right pretty this time of year with the first wildflowers coming up. I don't have a horse, Teresa said, stalling as her mind raced. Was he truly asking to spend time with her? I can borrow a gentle mare from the livery, Nathan said. Unless you'd rather not, Teresa took a deep breath. No, I'd like that very much, thank you. Nathan's smile was bright even in the dim light from the shop windows. I'll come by around noon if that suits you. Yes, noon is fine. Good night then, Teresa. Good night, Nathan. She watched him walk back toward the schoolhouse, his stride easy and confident. Only when he had disappeared from view did she let herself inside, climbing the stairs to her room with a lightness in her step that hadn't been there in years. Sunday dawned clear and mild, a perfect spring day. Teresa woke early, too excited to sleep late as she usually did on her day off. She dressed carefully in her riding habit, a practical navy blue that had served her well on the journey west. Her mother had insisted on the expense, saying a lady never knew when she might need to ride, though Teresa suspected she'd been thinking more of the impression her daughter might make on eligible bachelors in Denver or Cheyenne than practical considerations. At precisely noon, Nathan arrived, leading 2 horses, his own chestnut gelding and a pretty dappled gray mare. This is Daisy, he said, patting the mare's neck. Gentlest horse in the livery, owner uses her for giving lessons to children. Teresa approached the horse cautiously. It had been several years since she'd ridden, not since before her father's business troubles began. Hello, Daisy, she murmured, stroking the mare's soft nose. Nathan helped her mount, his hands strong and sure at her waist as he lifted her into the side saddle. His touch lingered a moment longer than strictly necessary, and Teresa felt a blush warming her cheeks. They rode at an easy pace, following a well-worn trail that led away from town toward the river. Nathan pointed out landmarks along the way, a distant butte shaped like a sleeping buffalo, a stand of cottonwoods that marked the boundary of the Diamond Bar, the faint outline of mountains on the horizon. Those are the Laramie Mountains, he told her. Beautiful country up there. Cooler in summer, though the winters are fierce. Have you always wanted to be a rancher? Teresa asked as they rode side by side along a stretch of open prairie. Nathan considered the question. I suppose I have. My father was a farmer back in Missouri, but after the war he couldn't see working that same land anymore. Too many memories, he said. Out here it's different. The openness of it suits me. You work for the Donovans now, but do you hope to have your own ranch someday? Nathan nodded. Been saving for it. Got my eye on a piece of land about 10 miles north of here. Nothing fancy, but good water access and enough grazing for a modest herd. He glanced at her. What about you? Did you always want to trim hats? Teresa laughed, the sound surprising her. It had been so long since she'd laughed freely, without worrying about how her smile looked. No, not exactly. I always enjoyed sewing and handwork, but I imagined I'd be doing it for my own family someday, not as employment. No interest in marriage back in Boston. The question was asked casually, but Teresa sensed Nathan was genuinely curious. She hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. There were limited opportunities, she said finally. And then my parents' circumstances changed and marriage became less of a priority than survival. Nathan seemed to sense there was more to the story but didn't press. Instead, he pointed ahead to where the land dipped toward a ribbon of green. "There's the river. We'll stop there for lunch." The spot Nathan had chosen was idyllic, a grassy bank beside a clear, swift-flowing river, shaded by a stand of cottonwoods just beginning to leaf out. They dismounted, and Nathan spread a blanket on the grass before unpacking a simple but satisfying meal from his saddlebags. Cold chicken, bread, cheese, and apples, with a jar of Mrs. Donovan's preserves as a special treat. "This is wonderful," Teresa said, looking around at the peaceful scene. "Thank you for bringing me here. Been wanting to show someone this place for a while," Nathan admitted. "It's where I come when I need to think or just to get away from the noise of the bunkhouse." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the river's murmur and the occasional call of a bird. After they'd finished, Nathan leaned back on his elbows, squinting up at the blue sky visible through the branches. "Can I ask you something, Teresa?" "Of course." "Why do you do that thing with your mouth when you smile?" Teresa froze, her hand automatically going to cover her lips. "What do you mean?" "You start to smile, real natural-like, and then you catch yourself and press your lips together like you're trying to hold something back." He sat up, looking directly at her. "Why?" Teresa looked away, her heart racing. She'd hoped foolishly it seemed that he hadn't noticed her smile, or at least hadn't been bothered by it, but of course he had. Everyone did eventually. "I was born with a condition," she said quietly. "The nerves on the right side of my face don't work properly. It makes my smile uneven." She forced herself to meet his eyes. "People tend to stare or worse, so I've learned to control it." Nathan's brow furrowed. "Is that all? I thought maybe you'd been injured somehow." "Is that all?" Teresa repeated, incredulous. "Most people find it disconcerting." "Most people are fools then," Nathan said with surprising heat. "There's nothing wrong with your smile, Teresa. You don't have to be kind," she said stiffly. "I've had 23 years to come to terms with it." "I'm not being kind, I'm being honest." Nathan moved closer, his eyes intent on hers. "The first time I saw you smile, really smile, not that careful thing you do, was when I mentioned having 2 left feet. And do you know what I thought?" Teresa shook her head, barely breathing. "I thought, there's a woman who doesn't smile often enough, that's all." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Your smile is just fine, Teresa Morgan. I wish you'd believe that." Teresa's eyes filled with tears that she blinked away quickly. No one, not even her parents, had ever spoken to her that way about her condition. There had always been an undercurrent of pity or embarrassment, carefully hidden but always present. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say you'll stop hiding," Nathan suggested gently. "At least around me." A tentative smile spread across Teresa's face then, unrestricted and natural, pulling up higher on the left than the right. She waited for the flicker of discomfort in Nathan's eyes, but it never came. Instead, he smiled back. "There, that's much better." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Then Nathan cleared his throat and stood, offering his hand to help her up. "We should start back before it gets too late." They packed up the remains of their picnic and mounted their horses for the return journey. As they rode, Teresa found herself talking more freely than she had in years, telling Nathan about her childhood in Boston, her father's business importing textiles, her mother's love of music and literature. "She's the one who taught me to sew," Teresa explained. "Said a woman should always have a skill of her own, something to fall back on if needed." "Wise woman," Nathan commented. "My father was the same way about ranching. Said a man needed to know how to do everything on a ranch, from mending fences to delivering calves, because you never knew when you'd be on your own with a problem that needed fixing." They were nearing town when Nathan suddenly reined in his horse. "Hold up," he said, his voice low. Teresa pulled Daisy to a stop. "What is it?" Nathan nodded toward a plume of dust rising from the road ahead. "Riders coming fast. Might be nothing, but let's wait here a minute." They watched as 4 horsemen appeared, riding hard toward town. Even at a distance, Teresa could tell by their rough appearance and the reckless way they handled their mounts that these were the same men Nora had pointed out at the social, the Flying J Hands. "Trouble," Nathan muttered as the men thundered past without noticing them, partially concealed as they were by a stand of brush. What do you think they're doing? Teresa asked. Nothing good riding like that on a Sunday afternoon. Nathan frowned. Let's follow but keep our distance. They rode cautiously toward town, staying far enough behind the Flying J men to avoid detection. As they approached Silverwater, they could hear shouts and the sound of breaking glass. Stay here, Nathan instructed as they reached the outskirts. I'm coming with you, Teresa insisted. What if you need help? Nathan looked like he wanted to argue but nodded curtly. Stay behind me then. They rode into town to find chaos. The four cowboys were drunkenly moving from building to building, smashing windows and firing their pistols into the air. The saloon's batwing doors hung askew, and several storefront windows lay in shards on the boardwalk. Deputy Simmons was trying to restore order, his gun drawn but clearly outnumbered as the men laughed and continued their destruction. A small crowd of townspeople watched from a safe distance, including Mrs. Abernathy, who spotted Teresa and hurried over. Thank goodness you're all right, the older woman said, taking Daisy's reins as Teresa dismounted. These hooligans came roaring in about 20 minutes ago, drunk as lords and looking for trouble. Where's the sheriff? Nathan asked, scanning the scene. Out at the Thompson place, Mrs. Abernathy replied. Their boy broke his leg and the sheriff drove them to the doctor in his wagon. Nathan's jaw tightened as he watched one of the cowboys take aim at the church bell. Hold my horse, he said, handing the reins to Mrs. Abernathy. Teresa, stay here. Before she could protest, Nathan strode toward the confrontation, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip but not drawing it. Teresa watched anxiously as he approached Deputy Simmons. Need a hand, Deputy? She heard him ask. Wouldn't turn it down, Simmons replied grimly. These boys have been drinking since last night, from the looks of them. The tallest of the cowboys spotted Nathan and sneered. Well, if it ain't Diamond Bar's prize bull, come to play lawman, Wade. Time to call it a day, Jenkins, Nathan said evenly. You boys have caused enough damage. We're just getting started, Jenkins replied, taking a swig from a bottle. This town could use some excitement. The excitement's over, Simmons stated. Drop your weapons and come along peacefully or it's going to go hard for you. The cowboys exchanged glances, then Jenkins laughed. 4 against 2, I like those odds. It happened so quickly Teresa barely had time to register the movement. Jenkins reached for his gun, but Nathan was faster, drawing and firing in one smooth motion. The shot kicked the pistol from Jenkins' hand, sending it spinning into the dirt. The other cowboys froze, suddenly sobered by the display of marksmanship. Nathan's gun remained steady, pointed now at the ground but ready. Anyone else want to try? He asked quietly, slowly. The men raised their hands. Deputy Simmons moved forward to collect their weapons, and within minutes, all 4 were disarmed and being marched toward the jail. Nathan holstered his pistol and turned back toward where Teresa and Mrs. Abernathy waited. The crowd had begun to disperse, some stopping to congratulate Nathan as he passed. Are you all right? Teresa asked as he reached them. Fine, he replied, taking his horse's reins. Sorry about the excitement. That was quite something, Mrs. Abernathy said admiringly. I haven't seen shooting like that since my late husband was alive. Nathan looked uncomfortable with the praise. Just lucky, madam. Nonsense, the older woman scoffed. That was skill, pure and simple. She patted Teresa's arm. You found yourself a good one here, my dear. Teresa blushed fiercely. Mrs. Abernathy, it's not we're not. I should get these horses back to the livery, Nathan interrupted, his own cheeks slightly flushed. May I call on you again, Teresa, perhaps next Sunday? I'd like that, she replied, unable to keep a smile from spreading across her face, her real smile this time, unguarded and natural. Nathan's answering smile was warm. Good, I'll see you then. As he led both horses away, Mrs. Abernathy nudged Teresa gently. My goodness, child, the way that man looks at you. You're imagining things, Teresa protested, but her heart wasn't in the denial. For the first time in her life, she dared to hope that someone like Nathan Wade might see beyond her imperfection to the woman beneath. The following weeks passed in a blur of quiet joy for Teresa. Nathan called on her regularly, sometimes for Sunday rides or picnics, other times just to walk with her after she finished work at the millinery. They talked about everything and nothing, his dreams for his own ranch, her memories of Boston, books they had both read, the changing seasons in Wyoming. With each meeting, Teresa found herself relaxing more in his presence, laughing more freely, worrying less about controlling her expressions. Nathan never seemed to notice her crooked smile, or if he did, it clearly didn't trouble him. The town noticed their growing attachment, of course. Some, like Nora Simmons and the Donovans, seemed pleased by the development. Others, particularly Annabelle Miller and her circle, were less enthusiastic. "I don't understand what he sees in her," Teresa overheard Annabelle saying one afternoon as she worked in the millinery. The blonde was examining hats with her friends, apparently unaware that Teresa could hear them from the back room. "She's not even pretty with that strange mouth of hers, and no family to speak of, no connections." "Perhaps he feels sorry for her," suggested one of her companions. "Nathan Wade doesn't court women out of pity," Annabelle snapped. "He's up to something, mark my words." Teresa's hands trembled as she pinned a ribbon to a hat frame. Could Annabelle be right? Was Nathan's interest in her merely pity, or something else equally humiliating? But that evening, as they walked along the river at sunset, Nathan's hand found hers, fingers intertwining with a naturalness that couldn't be feigned. He spoke of his plans for the future, the land he was saving to buy, the house he hoped to build, and Teresa found herself imagining a place in that future for herself. June arrived, bringing with it longer days and the promise of summer. The Diamond Bar's annual cattle drive to Cheyenne was approaching, which would take Nathan away for several weeks. The thought of his absence made Teresa realize how central he had become to her life in Silverwater. The night before he was to leave, Nathan took her to dinner at the hotel dining room, the closest thing Silverwater had to a fine restaurant. They ate roast beef and apple pie while Nathan told her stories about previous cattle drives. "It's hard work," he admitted, "dusty and exhausting. But there's something about being out on the trail with nothing but sky above you and good men around you that feels right." "How long will you be gone?" Teresa asked, trying to keep the sadness from her voice. 3 weeks if the weather holds and the cattle behave," Nathan replied. "Could be longer if we run into trouble." After dinner, they walked slowly toward Mrs. Abernathy's, neither eager for the evening to end. The night was warm, stars emerging one by one in the darkening sky. "I have something for you," Nathan said as they reached the millinery shop. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. Teresa unwrapped it carefully to reveal a slender book of poetry, Tennyson's In Memoriam, bound in soft leather. "I noticed you reading his poems from the library," Nathan explained. "Thought you might like to have your own copy." Teresa ran her fingers over the embossed cover. "It's beautiful, Nathan, thank you." "Open it," he urged. She did, and a pressed wildflower fell into her palm, a delicate blue columbine, the same kind that had been blooming by the river the day of their first ride together. "So you'll remember," Nathan said softly. Teresa looked up at him, her heart full. "As if I could forget." Nathan stepped closer, his hand coming up to touch her cheek gently. "Teresa, She waited, hardly daring to breathe as his gaze dropped to her mouth. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Instead of answering, Teresa rose on tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. It was a brief, sweet kiss, her first, but it sent warmth spreading through her body like sunlight. When they parted, Nathan's eyes were dark with emotion. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," he admitted. "Why didn't you?" Teresa asked. "Wasn't sure you felt the same way." His thumb traced the line of her jaw. "I'm not good with words like your poets, Teresa, but I want you to know that I've never met anyone like you." Teresa's insecurities surfaced despite her happiness. "Because of my face," Nathan shook his head firmly. "Because of your heart, your kindness. Your strength in coming out here alone, the way you see beauty in things others miss." He kissed her again, more deeply this time. "I'm going to miss you something fierce while I'm gone." "Write to me," Teresa asked. "Every chance I get," he promised, "and when I come back." He hesitated. "We'll talk about the future." Teresa nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. Nathan kissed her once more, then reluctantly stepped back. "I should go. We're heading out at first light." "Be safe," Teresa whispered. "Always am." He touched the brim of his hat. Good night, Teresa. Good night, Nathan. She watched him walk away, the book of poetry clutched to her chest, her lips still tingling from his kisses. For the first time in her life, Teresa Morgan felt truly beautiful. The weeks of Nathan's absence crawled by with painful slowness. Teresa threw herself into her work at the millinery, creating hats of increasing intricacy and beauty that drew customers from as far away as Laramie. Mrs. Abernathy was delighted with the uptick in business and gave Teresa a small raise. "You've got a gift, my dear," the older woman told her. "I haven't seen craftsmanship like yours since I worked in a fine shop in St. Louis before I married." Teresa appreciated the praise but found little joy in it. Her thoughts were constantly with Nathan, wondering where he was, if he was safe, when he would return. His letters, delivered sporadically as riders passed between the cattle drive and Silverwater, were treasured lifelines, brief but heartfelt accounts of life on the trail, the beauty of the country they passed through, and how much he missed her. "The stars here make me think of you," he wrote in one. "So bright and clear, like your eyes when you smile your real smile, the one I love." Teresa read and reread his letters until the paper grew soft from handling. At night she read Tennyson by lamplight, the pressed columbine marking her place, dreaming of Nathan's return. Not everyone in town was supportive of their budding romance. Annabelle Miller made her displeasure known, spreading whispers that Teresa was after Nathan's savings, or that she had somehow tricked or manipulated him. Some of the older women clucked their tongues over the match, commenting that a man like Nathan Wade could do better. But Teresa found unexpected allies as well. Nora Simmons invited her to tea and shared stories of her own courtship with the deputy. Mrs. Donovan stopped by the millinery specifically to tell Teresa how pleased she was that Nathan had found someone who appreciated him for more than his handsome face or skill with horses. "That boy's been like a son to us since his father passed," the rancher's wife confided. "All I've ever wanted was for him to find happiness with someone worthy of him." 3 weeks stretched to 4, then nearly 5. Teresa tried not to worry, reminding herself that delays were common on cattle drives. Still, each day without word from Nathan tested her newfound confidence. It was a sweltering afternoon in late July when Teresa looked up from her work to see a dust-covered rider dismounting outside the millinery. Her heart leapt, but it wasn't Nathan, it was one of the diamond bar hands, a young man named Billy whom she recognized from Nathan's descriptions. The bell jangled as he entered, removing his hat. "Miss Morgan?" "Yes." Teresa set aside the hat she'd been trimming, her stomach clenching with sudden fear. "Has something happened? Is Nathan—" "He's fine, miss," Billy assured her quickly. "Got a message for you is all." He pulled a folded paper from his shirt pocket. "We made it to Cheyenne all right, but there was trouble on the way back. Rustlers hit us 2 nights ago, made off with some of our horses. Nathan and some of the boys went after them. Asked me to let you know he's all right, but he'll be delayed getting back." Teresa took the note with trembling hands. "Thank you, Billy." "Welcome, miss." The young cowboy shifted awkwardly. "He also said to tell you not to worry, but that's probably asking too much." Teresa managed a small smile. "Probably. Do you know when he might return?" Billy shook his head. "Can't say for sure. Could be a few days, could be longer. Depends on how far they have to track those horses." After Billy left, Teresa unfolded Nathan's note. The handwriting was hasty but unmistakably his. "Teresa, don't worry. Tracking stolen horses. Will return as soon as possible. Think of you constantly. Love, Nathan." The word love made her breath catch. He hadn't said it before, not in those exact terms. She pressed the note to her heart, worry mingling with joy. 3 more days passed with no word. Teresa found it increasingly difficult to concentrate on her work, her mind constantly wandering to Nathan, imagining all manner of dangers. Rustlers were often desperate men, armed and dangerous. On the 4th day, she was walking home from the millinery when a wagon came racing into town, driven by one of the diamond bar hands. In the back lay a man, motionless. "Doctor," the driver was shouting. "Where's the doctor?" Teresa's heart stopped as she recognized the still form in the wagon bed. "Nathan," she ran toward the wagon as it pulled up outside the doctor's small office. "What happened?" she demanded, reaching for Nathan's hand. His face was pale, a bloodied bandage wrapped around his left shoulder. Ambush, the driver explained grimly as the doctor hurried out. Caught up to the rustlers near the Montana border, they were waiting for us. Nathan took a bullet meant for young Jimmy. The doctor was already examining Nathan. Let's get him inside, he's lost a lot of blood. Teresa followed as they carried Nathan into the doctor's office, refusing to be sent away. I'm staying, she insisted when the doctor tried to usher her out. The older man assessed her determined expression and nodded. Wash your hands then, I could use the help. The next hours were a blur as Teresa assisted the doctor in removing the bullet from Nathan's shoulder and cleaning and stitching the wound. Nathan remained unconscious throughout, his breathing shallow but steady. Will he be all right? Teresa asked when they had finished, her hands still stained with his blood despite multiple washings. The doctor sighed. The bullet missed anything vital, but he's lost a significant amount of blood and there's always the risk of infection. The next day or two will tell. I'm staying with him, Teresa said, her tone brooking no argument. The doctor looked like he might object, then shrugged. Very well, call me if his condition changes. Teresa pulled a chair next to Nathan's bed and took his hand, large and calloused but now frighteningly limp in hers. Don't you dare leave me, Nathan Wade, she whispered fiercely. Not when I've just found you. Through the night she kept vigil, bathing his forehead when fever set in, speaking to him softly, reading from the book of poetry he had given her. Sometime toward dawn, exhaustion overcame her, and she fell asleep, her head resting on the edge of his bed, her hand still holding his. She woke to the sensation of fingers gently stroking her hair. Opening her eyes, she found Nathan looking at her, his eyes tired but alert. There she is, he said, his voice weak but unmistakably warm. Nathan, Teresa sat up, tears of relief springing to her eyes. How do you feel? Like I was trampled by a herd of ornery steers, he admitted with a weak attempt at a smile, but better seeing you. Teresa's tears spilled over. You scared me half to death. Sorry about that. His hand found hers. Did they tell you what happened? She nodded. The rustlers ambushed you. You took a bullet meant for Jimmy. Kid's barely 17, Nathan said. Just couldn't let it happen. Always the hero, Teresa said, trying for a light tone despite her tears. Nathan's expression grew serious. Teresa, when I was lying there, thinking I might not make it back, all I could think about was you, about all the things I hadn't told you yet. Teresa's heart raced. You can tell me now, I love you, he said simply. Have since that first day at Hartwell's, I think, though I didn't know it then. Nathan, let me finish, he interrupted gently. I know it's fast, I know people will talk, but I don't want to waste any more time. When I'm well enough to get out of this bed, I want to take you out to that piece of land I've been saving for. I want to show you where I plan to build a house, and I want to ask if you might consider sharing that house with me as my wife. Teresa's tears flowed freely now. You don't have to wait until then, she said. The answer is yes, I love you too, Nathan, more than I ever thought possible. His smile was radiant despite his weakened state. Come here, he whispered, tugging her hand gently. Teresa leaned forward and Nathan kissed her softly, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. She didn't try to control her smile against his lips, letting it bloom naturally, crooked and perfect. Nathan's recovery was slower than he would have liked, but steady. The doctor insisted he remain in town rather than returning to the Diamond Bar, so Mr. Donovan arranged for him to stay in a room at the hotel until he was fully healed. Teresa visited daily, bringing meals and books, reading to him when he grew restless with inactivity. News of their engagement spread quickly through Silverwater, met with reactions ranging from wholehearted congratulations to poorly concealed disapproval. You're sure about this? Mrs. Abernathy asked Teresa one evening as they closed up the millinery. Not that I disapprove. Nathan Wade is a fine man, but it's all happened rather quickly. I've never been more certain of anything, Teresa replied honestly. When you know, the older woman smiled knowingly. That's how it was with my Albert. Knew I'd marry him the day we met, though it took him 3 months to work up the courage to ask. By mid-August, Nathan was well enough to ride short distances. True to his word, The first place he took Teresa was to the land he'd been saving to by a beautiful stretch of rolling prairie with a clear creek running through it, backed by low hills covered in pine and aspen. "It's not much yet," he said as they stood on a rise overlooking the property. 200 acres, enough for a modest herd to start with, room to expand later if things go well. "It's beautiful," Teresa said sincerely, imagining a house nestled near the creek, smoke rising from a chimney, children playing in the yard their children. "I've been negotiating with the owner for nearly a year," Nathan continued. "Got the final papers signed last week." He squeezed her hand. "It's ours now, Teresa, our future. Ours," she repeated, savoring the word. "When do we start building?" "Soon as I can arrange it," Nathan promised. "I want to have at least the main part of the house up before winter. We'll need to order supplies from Cheyenne, hire some men to help with the raising." "And the wedding?" Teresa asked, a blush warming her cheeks. Nathan's arm slipped around her waist, pulling her close. "Whenever you're ready." "Tomorrow works for me," Teresa laughed. "Perhaps we should wait until the house is built. Mrs. Abernathy has already offered to help with my dress, and I'm sure Mrs. Donovan will want to host some sort of celebration." "Whatever makes you happy," Nathan said, kissing her temple. "As long as I get to call you my wife when it's all said and done." The next weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Materials for the house were ordered and delivered, and a team of men from the Diamond Bar volunteered to help with the construction. Nathan spent his days at the building site, returning to town each evening exhausted but satisfied with the progress. Teresa divided her time between the millinery, where she continued working to save money for their household needs, and preparations for the wedding. Mrs. Donovan insisted on hosting the ceremony and celebration at the Diamond Bar, and Mrs. Abernathy helped Teresa create a simple but elegant wedding dress of ivory silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Not everyone was supportive of their plans. Annabelle Miller made a point of stopping by the millinery one afternoon when Teresa was alone, ostensibly to order a hat but clearly with other intentions. "I hear congratulations are in order," Annabelle said, examining a display of ribbons with calculated indifference. "Thank you," Teresa replied cautiously. "Nathan's always been impulsive," Annabelle continued. "Rushing into things without thinking them through, like that time he tried to break the buckskin stallion no one else could ride, nearly got himself killed." Teresa remained silent, suspecting where this conversation was heading. "His proposal was very sudden, wasn't it?" Annabelle's eyes met Teresa's directly now. "Right after he was wounded, I understand. Men often make dramatic gestures when they've faced death." "Nathan and I have discussed this thoroughly," Teresa said evenly. "There's nothing impulsive about our decision." Annabelle's smile was sharp. "Of course, I just wonder if he's really considered what he's giving up. The Diamond Bar could have been his someday, you know, Mr. Donovan thinks of him as a son." "Nathan wants his own ranch," Teresa replied, "his own legacy to build." With a woman most people whisper about behind her back, Annabelle's voice was sweet with false concern. "You must know what they say about your condition. About how someone like Nathan Wade could have had anyone and chose." "That's enough, Annabelle." Both women turned to see Nathan standing in the doorway, his expression thunderous. "Nathan," Annabelle's demeanor changed instantly. "I was just congratulating your fiancé on your engagement." "No, you weren't," he said flatly. "You were being cruel and I won't have it. Not to the woman I love." Annabelle's face flushed. "I was only trying to cause trouble," Nathan interrupted. "We've known each other too long for games, Annabelle. If you can't be happy for us, that's your choice, but I won't allow you to upset Teresa." Annabelle looked between them, her expression hardening. "Fine, I hope you'll be very happy together." She gathered her things and swept toward the door, pausing with her hand on the knob. "Just don't come crying to me when the novelty wears off and you realize what you've settled for." After she left, Nathan crossed to Teresa and took her hands. "I'm sorry about that. I came to surprise you for lunch and overheard." Teresa squeezed his hands. "It's all right." "I knew not everyone would approve." "Do her words bother you?" he asked searchingly. "A little," Teresa admitted. "Not because I believe them, but because I wondered the same things myself at first." If you were acting out of pity or gratitude after your injury, or Nathan silenced her with a kiss. Teresa Morgan, I have never pitied you a day in my life. I admire you, I respect you, I love you, and I cannot wait to make you my wife. The doubt that had begun to creep in at Annabelle's words dissolved under the warmth of Nathan's gaze. I love you too, Teresa said, her smile, her real smile, spreading across her face. By early October, the main part of the house was completed, a sturdy 4-room structure with a stone fireplace and large windows that caught the morning sun. There was still work to be done on the outbuildings and corrals, but the house was ready for habitation with a kitchen, living area, and 2 bedrooms. One for us and one for the children we'll have someday, Nathan had explained as he showed Teresa the finished rooms. The wedding was set for the 3rd Saturday in October, when the fall colors would be at their peak. The night before, Teresa stayed with Nora Simmons in town while Nathan remained at the Diamond Bar. Nervous? Nora asked as they sat by the fire after dinner. A little, Teresa admitted. Not about marrying Nathan, but about everything that comes after. Nora smiled knowingly. The wedding night, Teresa blushed. That, yes, but also just being a wife, running a household, eventually children. It's all so new. You'll learn, Nora assured her. We all do. And Nathan doesn't strike me as the type to expect perfection right away. No, he's not, Teresa agreed, thinking of his patience, his kindness, his unwavering support. I'm very fortunate. So is he, Nora said firmly. Don't ever forget that. The wedding day dawned clear and crisp, the aspens around the Diamond Bar glowing gold against the blue October sky. The ceremony would take place outdoors, weather permitting, with a celebration to follow in the ranch's large barn, decorated for the occasion with autumn flowers and lanterns. Mrs. Abernathy helped Teresa dress in her wedding gown, arranging her hair in an elegant style adorned with small white flowers. You look beautiful, my dear, the older woman said, stepping back to admire her work. Absolutely radiant. Teresa examined her reflection in the mirror. The woman who looked back at her was indeed radiant, her eyes bright, her cheeks flushed with happiness. For the first time in her life, she looked at herself and didn't immediately notice her crooked smile. Instead, she saw a bride, beloved and beautiful. Thank you, she said softly. For everything, Mrs. Abernathy patted her hand. I'm just glad you found your way to Silverwater. You've brought joy to an old woman's life and to Nathan's. The ceremony was simple but deeply moving. Nathan waited for her beneath an arch of autumn branches, looking more handsome than ever in a new suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his eyes never leaving hers as she walked toward him on Mr. Donovan's arm. You're beautiful, he whispered as she reached him. So are you, she whispered back, making him grin. They spoke their vows clearly, promising to love and cherish each other for all their days. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Nathan kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. The celebration afterward was joyous, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the evening. Nearly everyone in Silverwater attended, offering congratulations and gifts for their new home. Even Annabelle Miller came, offering stiff but polite good wishes before departing early. As the sun began to set, Nathan and Teresa slipped away from the festivities, climbing into the wagon that would take them to their new home. Well-wishers called out teasing farewells as they departed, rice and flower petals showering down around them. Happy. Nathan asked as they drove away, his arm around her shoulders. Teresa looked up at him, her husband, and felt a joy so complete it seemed impossible to contain. Completely, she replied, letting her smile, her real, unguarded, perfectly imperfect smile bloom fully. And you? Nathan's answer was a kiss that told her everything she needed to know. Their new home welcomed them as darkness fell, the windows glowing with lamplight that Mrs. Donovan had arranged to have lit in their absence. Inside, a fire burned in the hearth, warming the main room where simple but sturdy furniture waited a wedding gift from the Diamond Bar hands who had helped build the house. Welcome home, Mrs. Wade, Nathan said softly, leading her inside. The name sent a thrill through Teresa. Mrs. Wade. Nathan's wife. Home. After years of feeling like an outsider, always hiding, always conscious of others' stares and whispers, she had found her place with a man who saw her, truly saw her, and loved her exactly as she was. That night, as they came together as husband and wife for the first time, Teresa discovered a new kind of joy, a connection deeper than she had ever imagined possible. In Nathan's arms, she was beautiful, desired, cherished. There was no need to hide, no need to control her expressions or worry about how she appeared. There was only love, honest and true. The days and weeks that followed were filled with the sweet rhythms of building a life together. Nathan worked from dawn to dusk, establishing their small ranch, while Teresa created a warm and welcoming home. They learned each other's habits, preferences, moods. They argued occasionally, made up passionately, and fell more deeply in love with each passing day. By spring, they had a small herd of cattle and several fine horses. The garden Teresa planted beside the house flourished in the Wyoming sunshine. And on a warm May evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Teresa shared the news she'd been suspecting for several weeks. "Nathan," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach, "we're going to have a baby." The joy that spread across his face was everything she could have hoped for. "A baby, you're sure?" Teresa nodded, her own happiness too great for words. Nathan gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "Both of you." As Teresa relaxed into his embrace, she thought back to that first day in Silverwater, when she'd hurried down the boardwalk with her head down, hiding her smile, certain that no one would ever truly see her. How wrong she had been. Nathan had seen her, all of her, from the very beginning. They laughed at the girl with the crooked smile, but the cowboy never noticed anything was wrong. Because to him, nothing was. 5 years later, the Wade Ranch had grown prosperous under Nathan's careful management. Their house had expanded to accommodate their growing family, 2 children now, with a third on the way. Thomas, their oldest at 4, had his father's dark hair and easy grin. Little Emily, just 2, had inherited Teresa's hazel eyes and, to Teresa's initial concern, the same facial asymmetry that had marked her own life. "She's perfect," Nathan had declared when he first noticed it, kissing their daughter's cheek. "Beautiful, just like her mama." And gradually, Teresa had come to believe it, not just as words of comfort, but as truth. Her daughter was perfect, asymmetrical smile and all, and so, in her own way, was she. On a bright autumn afternoon, much like the day they'd been married, Teresa stood on the porch of their home, watching Nathan teaching Thomas to ride his first pony. Emily played nearby, arranging stones in patterns only she understood. The baby inside Teresa kicked vigorously, as if eager to join the family activities. Teresa placed a hand on her rounded belly, her wedding ring catching the sunlight. Her smile, her real smile, unguarded and free, spread across her face as Nathan looked up and waved. They had built this life together, day by day, challenge by challenge, joy by joy. A life where imperfections were simply part of what made a person unique, where love saw beyond the surface to the heart beneath. Nathan lifted Thomas from the pony and set him on the ground, then made his way to the porch, Emily running to meet him halfway. He scooped her up with one arm and climbed the steps to kiss Teresa softly. "What are you thinking about, looking so happy?" he asked, his free arm circling her waist. Teresa leaned into him, their children between them, their future growing within her. "Just that I'm grateful," she said. "For you, for us, for everything." Nathan's eyes, still as blue and clear as the day they'd met, crinkled at the corners as he smiled. "Me too," he said simply. "More than I could ever say." And as the sun began its descent toward the distant mountains, painting their land in gold, Teresa knew that this love, this family, this acceptance was everything she had ever wanted and more than she had ever dared to dream.